Ilan was 2 weeks ago. He joined us.
Right.
Yeah, and then Michael. Is this the same Michael who joined us a few weeks ago?
Yep.
All right. Well, why don't we get updates from the two newest members of the gang? Michael, Ilan, do you guys want to talk about what you've been up to in the last couple of weeks?
Sure. We're continuing to focus on the development of our digital rights management platform. We're about to release another feature, which is a copyright monetary flow tracker. And
how does that work?
Basically, we just plug into the APIs of all the different DSPs and do some calculations based on the number of streams. Each one right now has it's a little bit, I'm making it sound quite simple, but it's a little bit more complex than that, but that's the gist of it. And then I was talking to Fabian the other day, and he invited me to be on the call today, and he was getting me pretty excited about some of the things that are emerging. I know that Imogene was at the OMI Summit in New York yesterday, or is today, appearing by Skype or something. And we were just shooting ideas around, brainstorming a little bit about the RSong app. And I was hoping to get a little bit more clarity today about, what exactly RSong is and what the direction of our chain and RSong is going to be. I think there's some really interesting opportunity emerging, but there's also just a ton of competition and really great technology in many corners of the world here in this space. So I just wanted to see kind of, what was going on here at the ground level and hear more feedback about what RSong is and what the ideas are for the future. I know that Fabian was sharing with me that there's a kind of milestone date of the mainnet release in March. And he shared some of the objectives around that. And I had some really, I think, fun ideas about how I could maybe use, work with you guys or leverage the RSong tool. I'm not really clear on what RSong is, whether it's a tool, an app, a proof of concept, something that's going to be developed into something more.
Have you used it?
I have. I think the immersive codec is interesting from just a streaming perspective, a compression business model perspective. It seems like it's maybe sort of similar to half-speed mastering. I guess I'm hearing a little bit more of the mid-range. And I also had questions about, how tied RSong is to the cryptocurrency piece. That seems to be a real confusing piece for a go-to-market strategy. I wanted to also hear more from some of the people that have been, at the ground level with RSong about, what the product differentiator is that would make people adopt RSong over dot blockchain or, some of the myriad other ones that are out there that are similar. That's where I'm at.
Cool. So just in terms of flow, I think if we were to have Ilan give his updates, we might push too much on the stack in order to have the answers be relevant. So I'll go ahead and answer from my perspective, and then other people can chime in your questions about RSong and RChain. So from my point of view, RSong initially is, it was crafted to be handed over to a streaming company that was committed to a blockchain-based approach to providing access to musical content. That was its, but it was also a proof point for a lot of things. Our chain is a fairly sophisticated blockchain platform, and understanding a lot of its features and functions, genuinely understanding them requires a kind of depth that maybe people who are interested in the applications of blockchain, but not how blockchain itself works, are less interested in hearing about. So we've always understood that and recognized that the best way for people to monitor our chain's progress is via the dApps, via the applications, the decentralized applications that are running on top of the platform. And the features and functions of those applications would give someone who's less versed in the blockchain space a way to see, differentiate our chain from the other blockchains. So one of the things that we did with respect to our chain, just as a proof point, was to go ahead and put the audio data on the chain. Now, this is for music. This is not necessarily, the only way or the only viable architecture. For us, there was a reason to do that, which is to demonstrate that on our chain, you could build a variety of data market applications, blockchain-enabled data market applications. And here was one where you have a fairly significant data assets. They're being served from the chain. And guess what? That's impossible with Ethereum or Bitcoin. You can't do it.
So does that mean that RSong is disconnected from Ethereum? My understanding was that the two were intertwined.
No, not at all.
Oh, okay, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. And so
we launched a token, an ERC20 token, to help capitalize the development of RSong. But that ERC20 token will be swapped for the token when we go mainnet, we go live with mainnet.
So can you talk a little bit more about how, that's still foggy to me though. I'm glad to hear that it's disconnected from Ethereum, but will it still be a cryptocurrency tied to the sort of the basic foundational mechanics of RSong, whereas like with Hyperledger, it has nothing to do with any cryptocurrencies at all.
Let's get down to brass tacks and try to understand a little bit how these platforms actually work. And if we understand just a little bit of the mechanics, then we can understand some of the relationships. So what makes a blockchain work at all is a distributed consensus algorithm. So what makes a blockchain is that you have an economically secured, leaderless, distributed consensus algorithm. So let's unpack that and just understand what that means. A consensus algorithm is an algorithm that allows a bunch of computer programs to agree on a value. So here's a simple algorithm. All the programs get together and elect one of the programs as the leader, and the leader decides the value. That's it. Very simple. Now, that kind of approach has a variety of challenges that it faces. And an alternative approach would be one where you have a leaderless algorithm, right? So instead of electing a leader, you have a way of adjudicating amongst a bunch of different contenders that is objective, so that they can all agree. Proof of work is one such, where you can produce a cryptographic proof that one of the parties has produced the smallest amount of guessing, the smallest amount of work in guessing a particular value. So that's another approach, and proof of stake is yet another approach. The important part of all of this, like if none of that makes a lot of sense, the important part is just that you need to have an algorithm that allows all of these computer programs that are distributed. They're not running even in the same organization or on the same machine. They're scattered all over the internet. They need to be able to agree on a value. And in order for the algorithm to not be spammed by a bunch of bad actors, what you do is you secure it economically so that the actors have to somehow fork over something that is valuable, be it computational resources or money or some combination thereof, so that if you have a bunch of bad actors, they can't spam the network or take over the network in some way because it costs them too much to mount such an attack. That's
okay,
the,
but that's with regards to cryptocurrencies. What about just with regards?
No, that's with regard to a blockchain. It has nothing to do with cryptocurrencies specifically. This is what's necessary to have a blockchain at all.
Okay, so the differentiator that I'm looking for though is where do you separate having to do the proof of stake or the proof of work from a cryptocurrency?
Right. So the proof of stake or proof of work is all about providing this agreement amongst the participants in the protocol of a value. Now, the next piece of the puzzle is what answers your question. What value do the participants in the protocol agree on? And that value could be something simple, like a ledger, right? So the ledger would be, how much Quatloos does Michael have, and how much Quatloos does Fabian have, and how many Quatloos does Christian have, right? So that's a simple value. The value is a table or a ledger, and that's the answer that Bitcoin has used in answering the question: what value do the participants of the protocol agree upon? Another answer, which is a lot better than just a ledger, is to agree the value of the state of a virtual machine. So instead of a ledger, you're agreeing a computational state. Okay. And that's the answer that Ethereum gives. And that's the answer that most of the sort of third generation blockchains are giving. Is you agree the state of a virtual machine, and then you could implement a ledger as a result of a program that you wrote on top of that virtual machine. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you. And just taking a big jump now here, but I just feel I'm going to throw it out there. Maybe it's too big a jump for right now, but just to put it out there. If we wanted to build a blockchain-based DSP on our chain, what would be give me some like bulleted different product differentiators. How would it be? What would be the advantage of doing something like that?
So let's make sure we're talking about the same thing. When you say DSP, you could be meaning several different things in the technology around audio. So what do you mean by DSP?
I mean like a streaming service like Pandora or Spotify.
Okay, right. So there are several different architectures that are possible. And a lot of those have to do with how comfortable the users of that solution are with the ownership model for the data. And this was exactly the question that RSong was aimed at provoking.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay?
I like that. Yep.
All right. So the question is the community of people who listen to the content comfortable with a third party owning all of the audio content? So right now, most people on the planet seem to be comfortable with Spotify being the warehouse where a lot of that audio data is collected and maintained, and then a lot of people are uncomfortable with how Spotify then turns around and reports usage with respect to that data.
Me included.
Right. Okay. So having a third party own all the data makes it difficult, or more difficult, more challenging to be crisp and objective about the reporting of the usage of that data. It's not impossible, but it is more challenging. So another approach would be to put the actual data up on the chain. So you could house the data somewhere else, and then the community has to make a value judgment for themselves as to whether they're comfortable, because that third party that's housing all the data, right? They could say, well, we've got all your data. We think that it's valuable to you, and so we're going to raise the cost of accessing that data. That's just one way that things could begin to go a little south, or not have the kind of dynamics that could be used. There are all kinds of other ways in which that model could go south or have unintended or unwanted dynamics. Now, and another approach, and people critique this approach, but I think the dialogue is very valuable, is you actually put the data onto the chain, and then whether it's delivered as download or streaming is a separate issue, right? That issue is, has to do with how you chunk up the data and how the data is delivered in packets over some period of time. So that's this streaming versus download is a separate question. But in my opinion, the fundamental question here has to do with where the actual audio data is stored and housed. My belief is that probably there's room for both models, right? There's room for a community that says, no, as a community, we're going to decide what data should be stored and for how long, right? So it may very well be that the one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater song only has a lifespan of a few decades, and after that, the community sort of intentionally decides to forget that song by no longer supporting direct access via the public blockchain that is storing that data. Is that making sense?
Yes, it is. And can I follow up with another question? Is there a business model that's been kind of favored so far with regards to a RSong or RChain based DSP? I mean, when you were speaking, your reference to a third party made me think of the lobbying that I was just doing with regards to positioning for a third party fact checker with Congress over the MMA. And I can see how an entity like RSong would be an excellent application for the Copyright Office. but as you probably saw, like there's now this new thing called the AMLC, which has been put together by a bunch of people that were very much at the behind the scenes, but the power brokers behind the creation of the MMA. And, they've partnered with Dot Blockchain, and they just made a deal with Warner Brothers. So I feel like what's going to happen is the MMA is going to appoint probably the AMLC as the governing body of the MLC, and then they're going to use their Dot Blockchain initiative to basically do exactly what you just described, but maintain it all as sort of behind the closed doors or the walled garden.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right, and I think different communities are going to have different responses to this. Again, a lot of people are still not awake to data ownership. So there are, I think the irony goes back now, many years where people were making jokes about the implications of Snowden on Facebook.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
And that irony seems to largely be lost on people. Right. It's not something that people really grasp or understand. But I do think there's another angle which is coming down the pipe relatively quickly, that has to do with the environmental consequences of large data centers peppering the planet. Like that's actually a source of heat and significant heat. And to see that it's a source of significant heat, you can look no further than Google's patent applications for data centers, running up, in the Arctic Circle to cool them off, right? Which is not such a great plan, given the rate of melt in the Arctic circles.
That's why they're moving them to barges.
No, exactly right. So it's really the point I'm trying to make is that there are many consequences to data ownership, and I think as people wake up to the consequences of data ownership, right, from the egregious stuff like there are actually dark communities that own and maintain data sets of child pornography, right? So that's one class of data ownership questions that we're going to have to wrestle with, and there's other classes of data ownership issues that have to do with environmental impact, and I think more and more, I wish and hope that the community at large wakes up to those issues of data ownership. Right. And the blockchain provides a mechanism whereby you can skate between, so in particular, proof of stake blockchains provide mechanisms whereby you can skate between both of those issues. Right. So you can make it so that the community is responsible for paying the rent on the data sets that they find valuable. And as long as they're responsible, then it becomes a lot easier to have a variety of adjudication mechanisms about data sets that we find reprehensible or somehow immoral or not something that we want to support as a society at large. That's largely because they have to make a committed intention to support that data set by paying rent. And when they're doing that, you can follow the money, and as a result of following the money, you can law enforcement and other kinds of social control mechanisms can have a place and have a say. If we move from there to the community, we also have it decentralized, so it doesn't necessarily live in these large data centers. Then we can get much better as a community about the resource planning that goes into maintaining particular data sets. Essentially, be a lot more efficient. Right, that's the real nub here is we can be a lot more efficient about that resource planning, and therefore have a much better footprint when it comes to the environmental impact. So I know this all feels like it's far astray from music.
Well, yeah, you read my mind. It's not to you and I. It's like, I can't tell you how up and close and personal it is to what you're saying to me. But when I put my entrepreneur's hat on here and I'm sitting here thinking, how do I translate the core values of why we think this is a good idea to the dumbed down level of, I don't care about any of that stuff. I just want to listen to the music and I want to do it wherever I am. And I also potentially want to, make money from doing it, or I want to, how do I position it so that, what I'm looking for is to figure out here a marketing initiative or business development initiative that I could raise money around to build out a streaming service that has those core values sort of behind the scenes.
Yes.
But
And
but it's customer facing from a perspective of, servicing the real desire for the listener is they just want to listen to the music.
And I think that there's a great opportunity in terms of recognizing Generation Z, the alpha generation, what happens after the millennials. And if we're able to build up an ecosystem around streaming, around social media, just across all of the various pieces of what the entertainment industry can look like, that's, in my mind, that's the target market. It's the market of new music being created today. We'll worry about the past catalog some other time. Someone else will show up and unravel that ball of yarn. But in terms of where this could potentially go and recognizing the marketplace, I think I'm considering all the new technologies that are being created now and what we have at our disposal and what will be created over the next few years within the organization. We have a tremendous opportunity that we can certainly explore and figure out how to do it. And there's a lot of great minds within the organization that have been trying to figure this out, particularly a lot of focus around the idea of a decentralized blockchain-based streaming service and the putting identity into the song and the distribution of tokens and all those types of things. I do not believe a business plan actually exists of it. I might be wrong, Greg, if you would correct me, or Daryl, if you would correct me. But from what I understand around the initiatives of companies that we've been working with before, I know that there was the build, but in terms of the financial projections and being able to identify sales goals, onboarding of users, what the economics are with monthly subscriptions. I mean, there's a whole projection that needs to be built around this, and I believe if we're able to, number one, prove the concept around RSong. I mean, my personal goal is get a bunch of songs on there, embed identity through Mycelia, be able to distribute tokens, just figure that little thing out. That way we can actually be, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, but I don't think anybody in the world has done it yet. And if we can be besides, Emision putting out one song and people paying Ethereum for that track, but in terms of something more on an international scale, I think that that idea is something that no one has really jumped onto yet. And if we could prove that, then we can keep on building from that point.
Yeah, so I agree 100%. And I actually think, I guess what I'll say is I work backwards from the way most people work. I want the business plan to emerge. I want it to emerge out of what I believe to be very, very important conversations that need to be had first and foremost with the artists. In this sector, more than in any other sector, we have the creators have a kind of clout and driving force that we don't find in other market sectors. They I think we all know that unless they're treated fairly, we're not going to see the kind of music that we have seen in the past, because it just won't, the economics won't support that kind of behavior. You can't get people who've dedicated their lives to their craft, getting $8 off of Spotify.
So,
right.
Greg,
Grammy Award-winning song.
Yeah. So so that's just not that's not going to work. So my belief is that along with what Fabian said, what you have to do is you have to provide the artists, the creators who are the driving force here, two things. Number one, you have to show them that they can deliver an auditory experience that is unlike anything that has been delivered before, and much closer to their how they experience music when they are in the process of engaging music, right? And so that's really, in my opinion, the function of the immersion technologies. And it's not just a codec. There's a lot more to it than that. But the function of the immersion technologies, and we have seen this, I have seen this with my own eyes, and I've seen it with multiple artists. When the artists engage the immersion technology, they are moved to tears by how much closer it is to their own experience of musicking.
Yep.
Right. And so that makes the artist want to come to the platform.
Yep.
Right. And once you get the artist to the platform, then they can turn around to all of the people who are supporting their craft and supporting their musicking and say, this is where I'm releasing now. Come over here.
So, I think that proof of concept, my hope is with what we currently have, if we're able to prove the concept with 15 high-profile independent artists, and I'm working on the plan. I've been working on the plan, but it should be ready for prime time by after Thanksgiving. If we are successful in this initiative, we will have a handful of musicians that we will be engaging with, dialoguing with, to see how this works, if it works, the use case there, the reporting to see how all the pieces come together, and if they're satisfied with the deliverables of how it works economically for them and how technologically and sonically it all works for them. So, in my mind, it's like we're going to start small. 15 artists, it's enough, good place to begin. We launch around mainnet, and as that all comes together, we'll be able to see what the greater ramifications are in terms of what the steps can be towards writing to building the bigger platform. And I appreciate, Greg, the idea of writing a business plan later. I work the opposite way in terms of putting together a roadmap, but with full understanding that the roadmap is going to change along the way, and being completely flexible and acknowledging that, life has ways, inspirations show up along the way, new ideas and new technologies show up along the way. So having the flexibility to do it. But in the beginning, I'm always good. I've always been a fan of, here's the plan. We know at least what the first 5 steps are, and as we go, new ideas will present themselves.
So I agree with you 100%. Maybe I want to open up the conversation to other people, but I'll just say a couple more things, and then maybe we can open it up, and maybe at the end I'll tell a little story about my life in planning and music. I said there were 2 things, and I talked about the artist experience, and if the artist is convinced, if the artist wants to do this, they will go to the platform to deliver their content, and they will tell their supporters to go to that platform. The other piece of the puzzle that will bring the artist to the platform is to convince them that the platform provides fair compensation for their work.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, so we talked about what the immersion technologies bring. They bring the sort of the thing that gets them closer to their artistic vision. And the blockchain piece of it from RSong provides a compelling story about how they will be fairly compensated for their efforts.
Yep.
Because there's public, crystal clear accounting.
Yep.
It's really that simple, right?
Yep.
I mean, from my perspective,
I would like to ask a question. If that's all right. Is it okay if I ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, Greg, I have a question about block size, because you're mentioning data centers. So, on proof of work chains, if the block size increases, you're moving more towards centralization, because you need data centers almost to handle the throughput on the network. Is that correct? First of all.
So yes, I mean,
Okay,
the short answer to
right.
your
So
summary of dynamics is correct.
Yeah, so let's say block sizes are 128 megabytes on like a Bitcoin SV right now, which is because Bitcoin Cash just split. So can you describe to me a world where proof of work chains go forward and you have these large block sizes, and how that would affect something like how that would affect the end consumer if a technology like RSong would be built on a proof of work blockchain with a block size of 128 megabytes? Would that cost?
Yeah. I mean, come on. It's the economics just don't line up at all.
Okay. Yeah. Can you explain why?
Well, I mean, you've already hinted at what the reason is, right? First of all, proof of work is only designed to be about the transmission of the transaction data. It's not about it's not designed to be about the transmission of the actual content, right? The proof of work chains are all about the separation of the transaction data from any content. So I mean, the block sizes would be like orders of magnitude larger than that if you started to try to put the audio content on there, and that will just basically create a centralized architecture, and we're back to where we
square
started.
one. We're basically back to square one.
So
okay.
that isn't a good solution, right?
Yeah.
The proof of stake solutions are much better for all the reasons that we've outlined several times now. So I don't want to repeat that. The proof of stake mechanisms actually improve on that. But I wanted to get back to something, which I had left hanging, and that's just with RSong, we didn't decide the tokenomics. We left the token economics intentionally undecided. What we said was, here's an accounting infrastructure, which, for better or for worse, we take the playback of an entire song or entire unit of content as our basic unit of accounting, and we have the technology to provide an accurate playback count, and then how you get and then we can also use the metadata to apportion fractions of that playback count out to the contributors. Now, a fraction of the playback of Tiny Human is not something that today you can take to your local coffee shop and get an almond milk steamer with, right? You're not, so like that isn't going to happen, but you could turn it into a token. And what I believe, but there are several different stories about how that happens, and each one of those stories has different trade-offs. And I think what needs to happen is to bring the artist to the table and have that conversation with the artists. Like I imagine a world summit, right? In which we have, Imagine Dragons and King Crimson and Taylor Swift and Bruce Springsteen and a bunch of the artists coming together to talk about their views and values, so that it's supported in a token economic system. And that way they're taking charge of how their content is how they get remuneration for their work. That to me is needs to be folded into whatever the business plan is, because that's what it's that work is also the best marketing you could possibly do.
Yes. On that note, can I just jump in for a real quick sec? Because Fabian and I had talked about this, and I thought maybe one of an initiative that I had started working on with Iconic was to do a music festival here in Southern Oregon to celebrate the MMA. And I was just thinking while I was talking to Fabian that, if you did something along the lines of what you just suggested, Greg, in the context of a launch music festival where, you know, let's say you start with Fabian's first 15 artists and you work with them between now and, say, the launch of mainnet as this date approaches, where you're going to have an actual show where you're going to, you know, have people come to a place, maybe participate with it online as well. But you incorporate the possibility, you begin the dialogue now as you start to onboard those artists. You could start with Imogene and the guitar trio, you know, the artists that you've already got on there, and ask them, how do you want to monetize this? And then just start building it backwards from that. Just say,
Yes,
you know,
yes. Yes, that's exactly right. And that's what I think has to happen. Yeah. And I think, you know, the most interesting thing is that we have to recognize that we're flying by the seat of our pants. Nobody's ever done this before.
Right.
And we're going to make a lot of mistakes. Mm-hmm. And if we come together as a community in the spirit of goodwill and the spirit of cooperation, then we can try a bunch of things without the same kind of risk of failure, right? Where, you know, right, Imogene tries this, she got it wrong in this one way, and she's flat on her face. No, that's not the way we need to operate now. We need to operate what she tried it, it didn't work. The whole community learns as a result of that particular effort. And so Imogen doesn't fall on her face. Instead, you know, the community comes and rallies and supports her and says, thank you for your efforts. Now we know so much more, right? So this is the spirit of work that I think that we have to engage in now. And I believe that we can do this. I believe that you know, especially within the creative communities, there's a genuine understanding of how, you know, it's like if you go into a session and someone goes off, you know, and plays a few bum notes, the whole session is destroyed if everyone goes, wow, that sucked. Why are you doing that? You don't do that. No, you respond with loving kindness.
You know, I feel that way. The two calls that I've been on here with you guys and the interaction that I had with Fabian, I told him yesterday, I was just like, you know, just talking to you, man, I can feel the energy. It's imbued with the creative process for me. I just love it. You know, I think that's right, man. Let's just keep that as our mantra and let it happen.
I'll sprinkle in, Greg, that, you know, when I joined RChain, one of the conversations is, you know, the opening conversation was all around, what does a festival look like on chain? That's how you and I started our conversation through Rudy. Yes. And as we were trying to push towards that, you know, a lot of my focus has been what technologies need to be created to actualize that vision. And these conversations that we're having right now around, all right, here's RSong, here's the possibility of a new digital streaming provider, here's the possibility of maybe we can actualize an event over in Oregon through some of the resources that both Michael and I could bring to the table to say, all right, here's those 15 artists, here they are performing on stage, here they are on RSong, here's the opportunity then that extends into the cross-cultural collaborations, the embedding of digital identity and mycelia. I mean, all of these pieces really is as much as none of these things yet exists in the world, we are in a position to be the first ones in the world to actually pull it off. It's going to take a lot of steps. And as you said, there'll be a number of mistakes along the way because we're creating something brand new, but the race is on. There's a lot of folks that are out there that are working towards this. Unfortunately, we have RChain, we have RSong, we have a couple of pieces that are already in creation that we have access to. Now it's just a matter of, you know, being able to take a number of baby steps towards actualizing these dreams and the actualization of mainnet, and seeing that if we are able to launch a few things around mainnet and the portfolio companies are there along the way, so we're able to utilize those technologies as part of this entire initiative, it'll create for a much greater ecosystem on RChain, and it'll put us out there in the world.
So you guys, I have a conversation later today with some investors, and if you guys could share with me something to share with them to start to position, you know, if I was going to go raise some money, what would I raise money for?
I've got that information. If we,
okay.
Yeah,
I think there's also very interesting ways and creative ways in which you can do the marketing around this. For example, I read yesterday that a group of investors or an individual paid like $300,000 for virtual land in the project called Decentraland, So you could do some really wild shit where, you could have the first band in the world play a virtual concert, in VR in Decentraland, and then, running like immersions technology, right? Like that would be explosive for the blockchain space because you're combining VR, a festival in real time. There's just so many different ways in which you can get really super creative with the marketing around it. It doesn't have to be so like, just get the artists in the studios. Like there's just much more like weird things you can start doing now with the technology. I think it's still rough around the edges, but you kind of get what I'm saying.
I really, really appreciate what you just said. I have a list of individuals that I'm planning to reach out to when ready. One of those guys, his name's Jeffrey Burns. He was written up in the New York Times about 2 weeks ago about how he's building a crypto utopia in Nevada, and he made $300 million off of his Ethereum investment, and his whole thing is about creating a new society, and there's an entertainment complex and all that type of stuff. So he's on my hit list to reach out to. And related to all of that, I was speaking to a buddy of mine that's spearheading the whole music initiative between Facebook and Oculus. And, to your point, the concept of, can we put this thing on, can we embed digital identity into songs? Yes. Can we actualize it into an actual live event? Yes. Can we bring the players together to be able to film and record it and broadcast this through VR? Yes. Can we identify where we can go that is a cultural match for us, that is exploring how blockchain and physical locations come together? Yes. Can we actualize all those deals? Possibly. Do we know who to call? Absolutely. So the great thing here is that there are a lot of people that are in the space that are working towards creating this new expression of culture and the new use of technology. And it's going to be a step-by-step process. But as the team is building and as the tech is coming together, I think we can really we can make a few hits come out of this.
Yoko Ono and John Lennon in 1969, when John was having tax problems and status in the United States issues with the federal government, they created Newtopia. So there's a lineage here that we could pick up on. I think we'd probably get traction with her very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
There's also this. I was holding up this book here, this comic book, Gem and the Holograms. I personally am right now with my label working on a project that's completely virtual. So like it's a virtual band. There's the music. It's sort of like picking up on The Residents, but it's taking it into virtual space. I think that's a very exciting opportunity too, that a lot of millennials and next generation users of technology will start to really connect with.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we should open up the conversation and include Ilan and the other people on the call. Ilan, any updates from you?
Yes, totally. I was carefully listening to your conversation and thinking about all the conversation that I've had over the last few months regarding this topic. The one warning though, I know that we're, there's a lot of enthusiasm and there's a lot of energy going on, but we have to realize, this is the takeover by the private corporations of the technology in order to implement their system within the framework and the context that they know is also palatable and it's also coming. So that we're competing with the private entities which are doing private chains, or at least they pretend to do chains. So I think that there's a competition then, and I don't want to damn the enthusiasts, but I think we really have to be conscious that the ideals of Ethereum when they was launched is now big banks doing their private networks on Ethereum, but not really caring about how they're going to implement a public blockchain.
Yep.
On that particular topic.
That's why I brought the block size again in this conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think in regards to that, we're also seeing that all the major labels are starting to work on figuring out how to do blockchain. Ticketmaster's recent acquisition of a blockchain company to build up their ticketing solution is everybody's figuring out how to do it and what they're going to do, but nobody's built anything yet. So the race is on.
By all means.
Yeah.
By all means. So I'm on the VibeChain staff. For those who don't know, VibeChain is a crowdsourced playlist making platform that was born 4 months ago, and that we've been building. We're not focused on blockchain immediately. We consider blockchain to be a backend to our clients, which is the application, a DApp, maybe at some point, but not mandatory. And our idea is to implement a lot of the ideals that we've been talking about, that I've been hearing you talking about over the last half hour, into the actual company culture and as a basis for doing business, rather than waiting for the blockchain to enable that for us. So that's our approach, and then hopefully we can then map ourselves to blockchain once we see emerging technology come together. And obviously, I think that our chain is a very interesting platform with a lot of potential, and I'm enjoying being a part of the cooperative and in these conversations. And this is where RSong interests me. The only real big thing that has happened over the last couple of weeks, and last time I talked to you guys, is that we got a lot more financial interest, and so we are ramping up on that side to get our funding together for the end of the year or so, first end of January. And then the second part was we participated in a legal hackathon. I don't know how many of you are aware of the group that is at MIT Media Lab, which is called Computational Law, led by Daza Greenwood. And he was organizing a hackathon 2 weeks ago, actually, just after I had talked to you. It was about music rights and music distribution. And we had one of the lead on the Open Music Project, George Howard, who was there. And there was a couple of people also there talking about AI and how they can actually help with the music that are also blockchain based. And that companies was Andor, and they're based in New York. So there was a lot of very interesting discussion about music rights and how that's going to play out, and what we want to look for, and what we'd like to see happen. And especially on the side of the presenters, I think you can go on the website. If you go at law.mit.edu, it should lead you to the hackathon, and there's a few interviews there which are really worth watching. So that's basically it. But I think that's, our major discussion was like, how do you transfer digital right to smart contracts, and how do you make sure you don't fail, because failure is quite easy.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I think in my mind, that's why we start with a small number of 15 people, 15 artists. If we mess up with 15 artists, it's okay. We mess up with 10,000 artists, it's a big problem. We'll be out of business very quickly. Kayvon was over at the MIT hackathon, right, Greg?
That's right.
Yes, totally. And we worked with Kayvon. For those who, but last time I think we talked briefly about that. But it was before. I had so many things happen over the last month that I'm messing up the dates. But what happened? Yes, I met with Kayvon, and we implemented a basic kind of API to interact with RSong, so that we could have access to the RSong backend in our client application, so that people could select song that would be streamed from RSong onto the sound system where the music would happen. And so that was that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, I reviewed Kayvon's architecture there, and it seemed like a really good way to go in terms of being able to deliver the sort of features that you want while isolating you from any particular commitment to a backend. So that was good. In terms of RSong features themselves, one of the things that Kayvon and I have been working out is a search mechanism, because as the catalog grows, we're going to want to users or people who are listening to the listeners, let's say. I really don't like the word user. The listeners will want to search for various content, and so it turns out that underneath the covers, Rolang is an exceptionally powerful query language. That's one of its major design features, is that it provides a built, the language itself is built-in query language. and because it's backed directly by the blockchain as the data source, this provides exactly the right kind of a mechanism to implement search. So Kayvon and I have been working out that design. We have a fairly modular design in place to provide that. But moving out, just one of the things I've always wanted to do is to bring back that experience of wandering into a record store and discovering something because it happened to be in the bin next to the bin you were looking at.
Amen, man. That's the whole thing for me. I mean, I still buy vinyl because I can't stand streaming services because I don't want a machine just pointing out based on beat patterns what I think I might like.
Yeah, exactly right. So I think go ahead.
Just on that, I don't know if I might share this with you. It was very funny during our market research. We did a couple of we've been doing a regular weekly user testing, pilot testing, and one of the things that has come out very clearly is if you go from the age about 45 and above, everybody owns their music and their records, and goes shopping for vinyl and things like that. If you go from like 33 to 45, there is a very substantial amount of people. We're talking about like 8 out of 10 who have a split of 50-50. They own and they're part of streaming service. And anything under 30 is almost 9.99 out of 10 have only streaming services.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So the age group is very important consideration in the way that we also think about this market in the future. I think it's important to address and talk to the 16 and 15-year-olds and see where they're going, because in 3 years they're going to be the clients.
Generation Alpha, Generation Z. That's all I got to say.
It's really interesting that you say that, though, because is it already that time?
Yes,
it is.
Okay. Well, it was such a wonderful conversation. So are we on the this call, or are we on this Zoom
Greg,
room?
I'll send you the room. It's a separate room ID because we.
Okay. Yeah. Got it.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's on the calendar as well. So.
Yeah. If
nice talking to you guys. Thanks, Greg.
This was
wonderful.
Great. Thanks,
wonderful.
Mike. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks.
Bye, Elon. Thank you.
Ciao.
Daryl, catch you sometime soon.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that I talked with Greg, but hey, next time. Bye, guys.
So, Christian, if you wouldn't mind just texting me that Zoom room.
Will do. Yeah.